Good evening. It's another episode of My Favorite Book. My name is Monica. I work at Bookland, and I will be your host tonight. You're watching what I think is the 12th episode of My Favorite Book, an original program of Bookland Inc. We're about to hear from Marc Fischer from Half Letter Press, who is going to present their favorite book they've ever made. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the land from which we are broadcasting is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. Would you please join us in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. Bookland Inc. is a nonprofit organization located in Brooklyn, New York. We are celebrating 22 years of promoting artist books as art and primary research materials, and also social tools for social justice. We distribute work by artists and organizations within the academic market. We host workshops and exhibitions, and we publish books and also archival box sets. We are super duper excited to be doing our first serialized online program called My Favorite Book, which I've said about 5 times already. This is a program where we ask 18 different artists to quickly tell us all about their favorite book that they've ever made. So that means every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday throughout the month of June, we do a new episode from 7 to 7:30. You can check out our website for a full listing, a full schedule. You can find us at these places, bookland.org, at Bookland Art, on Instagram, or any social media platform that we use. And there's a bunch of cool links on Linktree/Bookland, including one where you can download our newly designed, newly re-edited Bookland Education Manual. I would also like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for supporting My Favorite Book. Okie dokie. So tonight we are delighted to introduce Marc Fischer of Half Letter Press. We will be speaking to him from Chicago tonight. He is going to present Prisoners' Inventions. I'm going to read a brief bio, and then I'll hand it over to Marc. They'll talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll do a brief Q&A. So if you are watching from YouTube Live, you can put your questions or comments in the chat, and I will tell Marc what those are. Okay. Temporary Services is Brett Bloom and Marc Fischer. They started working together in Chicago in 1998 as a larger group. In 2008, they started Half Letter Press, a publishing imprint and online store. They're currently based in Chicago, Illinois, and Fort Wayne, Indiana. They produce exhibitions, events, projects, and publications. The distinction between art practice and other creative human endeavors is irrelevant to them. And I hope Marc will also talk to us about what that means. Hey, Marc.
Hey, I'm so happy to be part of this. So I'm repping for Brett and I. Yeah, that last statement I think really kind of is driven home by the book I'm going to talk about, which I never think of our stuff in terms of favorites. It's just, we just keep making publications. The newest one is the favorite one. The one we're talking about in any particular moment is the favorite one. But I think, books are really like these kind of like printed celebrations of everything that goes into working with other people. I always sort of say to people kind of like books are a way to spend time, like making a book with someone is really kind of like commitment to spending time with that person. And this book had a really interesting kind of origin. So they're sort of talking about 2 books. This is the first version of Prisoners' Inventions, which was published by White Walls. And this came out in 2003. It went through a few printings, was designed by the Kittenhead Show, which is Liz Anderson, now based in Los Angeles. And then earlier this year, after many years of this book being out of print, we reprinted it ourselves using our Half Letter Press imprint. And it was designed by Partner and Partners based in Brooklyn. And at the time that we first were working on this, Salem Kola-Julin was also a member of Temporary Services. The book came about as part of an invitation from Josh McPhee, who's sort of part of the extended family of Brooklyn, Daniel Tucker, and Midnight, the artist formerly known as Emily Foreman. And it was for an event at the Hyde Park Art Center. And we had already exhibited drawings by our friend Angelo, who's someone I'd been corresponding with, who was incarcerated in California. We'd been corresponding since around 1990. And we came upon, I'm going to start sharing a quick presentation, and then I'll come back and talk without the presentation. I think you should be able to see that okay. And Monica, do you want to give me a heads up in the chat maybe that this is visible? Or let me know audibly?
It's visible.
Fabulous. Amazing. Okay. So this is a reprint. Yeah, so we invited Angelo to talk about and draw different things that he had seen other prisoners invent. We'd often have in my written correspondence with him, he would sometimes talk about different things people made. And because temporary services always had this interest in creativity that has kind of all of the imagination of art, but exists for other reasons, in this case, to negotiate the restrictive prison environment, to solve common everyday problems. And we put this invitation to Angelo. This is kind of what Angelo normally does, and sort of like the kind of work that we had exhibited previously in this little office space we had, which is that he would make these narrative drawings dealing with kind of like set in different historical situations. This is his version of the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian. He would make these drawings that often explore these themes that kind of look a lot like the power dynamics of prison, but displaced to other times and cultures. They're really complicated, interesting, sometimes really problematic works. So Angelo could draw and write about anything that he had observed. These are not inventions he made for the most part. A lot of it was things that he saw other people make. And he thought about this invitation to make, like, we were going to make like a photocopied zine for this event that Josh and everyone else was organizing at Hyde Park Art Center. And Angelo kind of sat on the idea for a long time. The date totally passed without him finishing anything. And I think what he said he was struggling with was like why this would be interesting, because it was so commonplace for him. And then he gradually realized that for someone who maybe had never been to prison, seeing how people deal with prison life through these inventions maybe could be compelling as a way of sharing something of that experience. So he started sending us these pages that were formatted for a half-letter size sheet of paper with these texts and drawings. This was a way of making a cigarette lighter using a couple D batteries and masking tape and some wire scavenged from like a hair dryer or a broken immersion heater. And he sent so much of this material, we realized maybe it could be more than a booklet and possibly a book. And then we started thinking about an exhibition. We realized it would probably not be super interesting to just have 100 pieces of white paper with drawing and writing on them. We wanted to start thinking about more tactile ways to show this material. And then we realized we could easily make these objects from Angelo's drawings because the drawings were so precise. So we started building facsimiles of these things from Angelo's illustrations. Here, kind of a self-portrait that Angelo created. This is him using stacks of towels and folding over his mattress to create a second desk surface or work table because there's only one desk and chair combination in a cell for two people. A lot of techniques around cooking, using light fixtures, in this case, to heat up bread and lunch meat or make a kind of pizza. These are also cooking devices. A stinger is slang for an immersion heater. So a way of boiling water to make instant soup or instant coffee or tea or anything else you would need water for, hot water for. Lots of stuff like in this drawing on the right, involving sticking bits of metal and plastic into electrical outlets. And, when you make these things, the lights in your home start dimming, and they're really kind of unsettling to use. More cooking techniques, in this case, wadding, re-rolling toilet paper to create a very hot, fast-burning flame that can be used to heat metal shelves in the prison cell. More cigarette lighters. Angelo was incarcerated in California. At the time, it was possible to smoke outside, but not in your cell. And cigarette lighters and matches were ultimately outlawed. So there was all this interest in making things you could use inside your cell, because other guards who frequently also smoked would sometimes be quite sympathetic to prisoners smoking, as long as it wasn't too out of control. Eventually, smoking was completely banned inside and outside the prison yard. So all of those things are kind of outdated. Ways to extend electrical plugs. You have two people sharing only two electrical outlets with multiple appliances they might want to run simultaneously. So things like that. Here's another model for how to do that. A lot of things were by a cellmate that Angelo had for a while named Jerry, who was just particularly ingenious at these kinds of electrical devices. So there were one of the beautiful things in making this book was, we were collaborating with Angelo entirely through the mail, but then he was also talking to all the people, in his world. His cellmate at the time that he was writing this, Paul, was someone I also corresponded with, and Paul was kind of like Angelo's in-house editor before everything came our way. And another part of this, because this was a book but also an exhibition, was that we had this idea of, it was Angelo's idea of having a copy of his prison cell in the exhibit. And originally he was thinking maybe it'd be a small cardboard model, and then he had seen some work from a publication we made by our friends Rob Kelly and Zena Sikowski, and saw their ability to build things, and thought that maybe they could build his cell life size. And his reason for wanting this was that as part of guards training in California, they were made to spend a certain amount of time inside a prison cell to get a kind of physical, psychological understanding of what it might feel like to live in that space. So Angelo liked the idea of exhibition visitors being able to have something of that experience. And then to aid in that, he created these really exact blueprint drawings. And the first execution of this cell recreation was at MassMocha, and by their preparator, Richard Criddle, and his team. And this is the version of the cell made from Angelo's drawings. So I'm going to stop the screen share now. So yeah, there were so many, such an incredible kind of chain of collaborations in the making of this book, collaborating with White Walls. The managing editor was, at the time, was Anthony Elms, who Brett and I both went to grad school with. The editor, Joel Score, was a friend to make the new version of the book. This was our second collaboration with Partner and Partners, who we've just really had a wonderful experience working with. This time for editing, because there's a lot of new material in the book. Since it had last been published, there's about 80 additional pages. Angelo made a lot of additional drawings after the first book went out of print. So this was an opportunity to publish that work. And also we brought on our friend Mairead Case, who's also done a lot of teaching work inside juvenile detention facilities. And it was great to have her involvement in editorial capacity, working with a different printer locally. Of course, like publishing a book during pandemic, always a rich, complicated experience. We deliberately used a printer based in Chicago, M&G Graphics, knowing that, with everything that's been crazy with the postal system and everything else, they're about 8 miles from my house, and drove the pallet of books into my garage when it was finished. So it felt like a real triumph to finally get this book back into print. It had been out of print for so long. It's the book that everyone asks us about at book fairs. Like, you ever going to get Prisoner's Inventions back in print? That thing's been out of print forever, man. We would hear that all the time. Max Schumann from Printed Matter would bug us. The stores that remembered carrying it and sold lots of copies of it, like, you ever going to reprint that? We just got so tired of hearing it. Like, really finally had to make that happen. And the whole book, all of the original design files were lost and made on Quark, probably, maybe PageMaker. I don't think they used PageMaker. So it really had to be rebuilt from scratch. And that's just not fun. That was the least favorite part of the book. Rebuilding all of the stuff that had already been done, and looking for files, and all kinds of translation problems that happened from pulling the text from a PDF scan of the original book, and all these swapped around characters. So that part was absolutely terrible. But really satisfying to have this book back in the world. Also bittersweet because Angelo is no longer alive to be able to celebrate this with us, and as we get like wonderful press for it and people telling us how much they love it, like it's unfortunate that he can't see that. He was never actually able to have a copy of the book while he was in prison. I finally met him shortly after he was released. This was like 2013, and was able to give him a copy of his own book. The mailroom wouldn't let him have it because it shows how to make things that are contraband. So this kind of absurdity that he mailed out all of this material that was published and so widely seen, but he couldn't even have a copy of his own publication that he generated. So I think probably I'm at the Q&A point, I think, at this point.
Hi.
So if anyone in the chat has questions, or Monica, if you have.
I do.
Hope I laid that out in a coherent way.
No, thank you so much. It's so great.
It's not a 15-minute project, but to talk about, there's so many stories and so many.
No, it's not, and we're gonna get into more minutes right now too. So I'll just reiterate for anybody who's joining us, you can put questions or comments in the chat on YouTube, and we'll get to those. But first, I just want to say thank you for sharing this. I know this is a dear book to you, and I've heard so much about it, and so now I have my hands on the newest edition, and I'm so happy to do so. I want to say that I just kind of like glanced at the cover, and the listing of all the things that I'm only imagining are just these are inventions that Angelo, or, in this book, catalogs.
Yeah. So
an extra finger jumped out at me, and I don't even want you to tell me what it is.
It's one of actually the non-sexual things.
Well, I just want that to be the mystery that pulls people in and gets this book.
You've got to read the book to find out.
Extra finger.
What the extra finger is for.
Or
not
how
just what it is,
an extra
but
finger.
why it is, right?
So I in some ways I don't know where to start, because there's so many things that I would like to talk to you about that I think we've talked about before, but there's I think there might be a Half Letter Press documentary in the future that will cover all of those bases, because you go into so much about how it is that you make all these things and what are the building blocks of how you make them. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think of you and I don't know if I'm pointing the right finger at Half Letter Press, or if it's Temporary Services or you or Brett or what is it? The public collectors. There are lots of iterations of what your work means to me, at least. And maybe you could talk about like how those things break down to you, why there are so many terminologies. But I also see you as like an indexer, like just kind of a manic indexer of under-recognized parts of our cultural landscape, of our political landscape, of our documented landscape. And so I know I've laid out a few questions already, but I also want to ask, like, what do you see this book, how people come to understand it? What do you see the value of putting this story out in the world? And maybe what are some of the ways that you've learned from its reception, how the value of that story has evolved or lived on since publication?
Yeah, I mean, there obviously there's so many, there's so many books about prison. There's so many films about prison, and the kinds of things in this book show up a little bit here and there. Like, part of like us asking Angelo to describe this or about this is, you watch things like, documentaries, and maybe like in the background, there's some kind of like coat hanger someone made out of some odd combination of materials, or you see some film where prisoners are like making little cars that cockroaches pull and they're racing them, but that's not the subject of the film. That's like this little moment that in some way illustrates something about the humanity of people who are in this, experiencing this situation, who are, have had this like kind of been forced into this reality. And so I think, like this book was really a way of showing something that I think, certainly humanizes people who are incarcerated. It shows, people's like very basic human desires to have these kind of fundamental experiences within the limitations, that they're forced into, so, that if you like were a mechanic before you went to prison, like, of course you would still want to be able to fix things and manipulate materials. Or if you liked cooking, like, you would want to be able to cook and like transform ingredients into meals that were a lot more enjoyable to eat than state issued food. Or, just like aspects of like prisoner sexual desires, which is like completely taboo thing to discuss, that prisoners would like make things to help them feel sexual sensations, like, like in that, or that they would make like condoms because, like how they would do that. And, and so much of like what people are, receive about what people make in prison is that they make weapons, they make, or they like create ways of making alcohol, like a brewing wine or something like that. And like, yeah, that's part of it. But we didn't give Angelo any guidelines about what to write about and what not to write about. But it was his decision. Like, he had no interest in illustrating weapon making techniques. Like, it just wasn't on his mind at all. And I think like people getting to see something like this generated, not something generated by a collection of all of the things guards have confiscated, but a collection of information collected by people who going through the experience of being incarcerated, so, Angelo, I think, was kind of like, our amateur anthropologist or something on the, or documentarian on the inside. And again, also, I think just like the experience of collaborating with him after having this friendship that predated the book by so long, and doing it, without, I mean, we did not ask the prison for permission to collaborate with him. It was all about what could be accomplished through sending letters back and forth. He and I never even spoke on the phone until after he was released from prison. at one point I tried to visit him while he was incarcerated, and my request to visit him was approved 3 months after I submitted it, which was 2 months after I came back from California. That was really convenient. But yeah, and I mean, temporary services, we've always, been interested in working with people who are kind of on the margins. I think like our own practice is fairly marginal itself, and I mean that's always where the interesting shit is. Like, I mean, it's always like the stuff you can't see at art fairs, and it's always it's like in the museum library more often than it's in the museum, right? So I mean, the project did begin at Mass MoCA, in a museum, but the book, would have happened anyway, right? It would have been a photocopied booklet like we were originally thinking. But and it was actually, I mean, it was noteworthy for it was actually our first book, like perfect bound offset book. We at that point we had still just been photocopying things. It was around this time that it came out that we started making things in larger quantities where it made more sense to use offset printing.
What quantity did you print these in, the second printing?
There were White Walls probably produced a few thousand copies. For our reprint earlier this year, we started with 2,000. So we made 2,000 copies. Again, like going into it with like no book fairs, no like stores at the time functioning in kind of reduced capacity. Some stores closing, but weirdly, like some people in a pandemic, like getting inspired to open a bookstore, like you go, whatever. What do you need from us? How can we help you? Like, sure, let's work together. Great. Like, yeah, I guess people get vaccinated. Like, no one knew how long that might take. A year ago.
Yep, long enough to make a bookstore.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's been going really well. It's great because there are all these people who, it's been out of print so long that they just had no idea about the original book. So it's completely new to them. And then there are people who knew about the book who are like, oh, wow, all this new material that was not in the first edition. So it is greatly expanded. And also was an opportunity for us to write a longer introduction and really kind of talk about the history of the project and its genesis and all of that. So
cool. I'll just we have a question in the comments, but let me just flash this real quick since we're talking about the book itself and where to get it. halfletterpress.com, right? That's where you can find the book in question.
Yeah.
Prisoners' Inventions. And then just to explain what else is here, if it weren't totally obvious, at Half Letter Press is where they can find them on Instagram. And Marc, maybe you can tell us what temporaryservices.org, what is that? Like, what will people find there?
That's really the history of temporary services work in general, going back to 1998. And you can find other publications we've made there as well. A lot of things are available in PDF form, things that have been out of print for a long time. So yeah, that's we started Half Letter Press in 2008 as a way to publish our own work, but also work by other people. We'd also we were never, temporary services was not, we're not a not-for-profit. It's not a business. It doesn't have like a board of directors. But when we started really selling the publications we made, we kind of needed to deal with the realities of things like, the IRS and stuff like that. And formalized, to make a press that, to make the press be the business and continue to leave temporary services, and our collaborative work undefined in that way. So yeah, Half Letter Press kind of provides the business structure that also helps temporary services function in the kind of unconventional, erratic, autonomous way that it
Go on.
Yeah.
So let me get to that question we got in the chat real quick. Small question. Do you imagine the book as supportive of abolitionist goals?
Yes, and that was something we talked about. We did this talk a couple months ago for Printed Matter with Mariam Kaba, who, is, if we had like a favorite abolitionist program to go with favorite books, like we could, or favorite abolitionist books, like Mariam Kaba would be like in that.
Absolutely.
That category. Yeah, but that was something that was harder to deal with while Angelo was in prison. I think like our own feelings about abolition, have certainly evolved in the last, what is it, like 18 years since we first invited him to make this book with us, right? So it's a lot easier to talk about abolition when your collaborator is out of prison. Maybe, or not. Yeah. I mean, it's like we could have had that conversation, but we were being, throughout this whole project, we had to be extremely mindful of his safety and the precarity of him making a book with us about illegal activity, in prison while he was still incarcerated. And so, we deliberately used this artist name, which was his artist name that he chose. That's how he has always signed all of his drawings and work. Not disclosing where he was incarcerated, not directing the press his way. So we were very protective of his privacy and his safety while we were doing the project. Now, in the new version of the book, post his release, and now, since his passing, we can be more open about that. And yeah, I mean, the book, on every page practically shows these human responses to inhumane, punishing, living situations, right? But in like unusual ways, right? A lot of it is like what people do for amusement, like making a paper rocket and tying hunks of bread to it and using like this like toy to kind of lure seagulls to drag this like flying object through the air, as they fight over bread in the yard. Like not the most obvious story that one might use to promote the idea of prison abolition. But I think that's always been in there, but I think that it's not something that's been as comfortable to talk about while kind of looking out for Angelo during his lifetime.
That makes sense. Well, where are we then? Do I have any questions I wanted to ask you? Probably. I did, if you don't mind, I wanted to give a shout out. Well, one, I wanted to give a shout out to Partner and Partners, because not only did they do a great job on this book and so many other things that I've seen them do, but they also did a great job on Bookland's new website. So as you go to our website, you can know that was a work of art by Partner and Partners. And then also
the book's available through Bookland too, also. So if you want to support Bookland, like, it doesn't have to go through us. You can make Monica pack the mail orders too. Totally make Marshall.
That is really what you're making me do, right?
Yeah, it's totally fine.
I do. I also want to say that this is something that I think we sort of have in common in terms of values, and that you've put a lot of work and words to, is the disinterest in competition, as people who are all invested in independent, small press and publishing, that, and I do want to point to the book Against Competition that Marc Fischer did, that Bookland also carries, but it's a great read. It's super affordable, and it outlines a lot of the things that I also appreciate in your 10-minute lesson rant manifesto that I now have, and that as I've opened up, as you can see, I'm starting to make notes with red pen on things that I want to follow up with you about, because I think they're very interesting. And anyway, I just wanted to note that that is an aspect of the work that you do that I think is really important and is well received by me personally and by Brooklyn, is that that's a world that we want to live in and participate in when we can do a lot of like mutual support, mutual aid work, and know that we are allies in doing this kind of work and not in any way in competition with each other, because you know what? There's no prize.
Right. And why make
What's
books,
the prize?
why make books compete against each other for being people's favorites?
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Monica's work through Half Letter Press too. It's all in the family. Yeah.
We're all in the family. All right, I'm gonna do some little summarizing words for everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Marc, so much. Please check out halfletterpress.org and
.com.
Sorry, yeah.
.org.
Okay, halfletterpress.com, temporaryservices.org, at halfletterpress on Instagram. Please check them out. You can find us at these places. And then I also want to say that tomorrow night we have a very cool guest. Colette Fu is talking about her favorite book, A Day in the Terraced Rice Fields. So good. And Marc and I were just talking about her and her work, and it's totally amazing, and you should come back for that. We also have a full schedule of everything ahead of us on booklyn.org. And if you like the programming, please subscribe to our channel. We have 38 people subscribing, and I'm so psyched. I know that's not great in YouTube land, but in our world, we are loving what we're doing now. Thank you so much, Marc, for your time and your words and all of your work. And do you have any closing remarks you would like to add?
Attend Colette Fu's talk. I was telling Monica, Colette was our neighbor at the Philadelphia Art Book Fair a bunch of years ago, and I got to watch her present these incredible books she makes to people and see their expressions of wonder and amazement, like over and over and over again. Definitely check that out. I'm excited to go back and watch all the programs I missed in this series, because Brooklyn just has really good taste.
Thank you. That's so great. Well, good night, everyone. Good night, Marc. And I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Monica. Thank you, everyone who tuned in.